Welcome to Catalyst COVE, a place where transformation begins. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This book was published by Pauline's Africa Books and Audiovisuals. What I Never Told You, Memoirs of a Recovering Addict, 2nd edition. Written by Titus Ndiritu KIHARA and Michael MacDonald. Read to you by Catalyst COVE. This book is meant for all those suffering from alcoholism and sex addiction and for their families and friends. Preface to 2nd edition. When we wrote What I Never Told You, we had no idea that within a few months, our inboxes would be flooded with thousands of emails from Kenyans suffering from sex addiction. Person A wrote, and I quote, "Thank you for coming out with your story. It has really encouraged me to know that I can change, that I'm not the only one with this problem. Many people believe that only alcohol and drug addicts have problems, leaving the sex addicts with no place to get help." Person B wrote, "I'm 26. You are the only person who knows what I'm going through. Could you help me get out of this self-destructive and shameful behavior? I'm tired of it but can't rescue myself." And Person C wrote, "I'm 34. I've molested over 40 boys and it's killing me. I've tried to stop. I've prayed, fasted, done all of those things. I'm finally giving up, just allowing addiction to rule my life." Our book was meant to say, there is hope, but our readers wanted to know, where is hope? At the time, there are no certified sex addiction counselors in the country, nor any rehabs for people suffering from sex addiction. But things are changing. Titus has been spreading awareness about sex addiction, and his efforts led to the founding of Recovery Trails, a treatment center for people with addictions. When Michael went to the States, he started Cure Shame, www.cureshame.com, a group of international counselors and volunteers who partner with Kenyans to fight sex addiction. Cure Shame contacted Sexaholics Anonymous, who agreed to send 2 long sober members to give training and recovery workshops to addicts and counselors in Nairobi. We extended this opportunity to over 1,000 correspondents suffering from sex addiction and to hundreds of counselors. Unfortunately, the number of sex addicts who came were few. Much work needs to be done before sex addicts can know where to turn and who to trust. If you or a loved one is suffering from sex addiction and want help, please contact recoverytrails@gmail.com. If you are a counselor, cureshame.com will be posting opportunities for trainings in Kenya. And if you have an interest in helping Titus spread awareness about this disease, you can call him at 0717 607 3836. Forward by Ndiritu's father. It takes courage and determination to look at the inner self. Many of us would opt not to look or talk about ourselves. We prefer to look at others with a judgmental mindset. Personally, I appreciate this effort by our son, who deliberately delved into the mystery of a wasted period of his life. This story stirs rich hopes in my heart as it bears within itself a profound testimony that grief and anxiety, personal failures and so much pain are not the end of one's life. There is always hope. Each one of us can rise from the dust. One of the greatest pains of a parent is to watch their child sink into alcoholism despite their wish to stop it. Personally, my wife and I went through the hell of agony, disbelief, and mistrust in the process of trying to rescue Ndiritu. We made many mistakes. All that happened was out of love. I'm sure when parents encounter a difficult child, they might also fall into a similar response. So what lessons did we learn from our son's addictions, and what can others learn from it? A great lesson that I have learned through the journey of our son's recovery is to be patient, even when everything goes berserk. I've learned to listen and empathize with the person as well as the situation. This is easier said than done. Yet, just as suffering is contagious, so is healing. As Ndiritu healed, so did we. The more he spoke about his addiction, the more we found the courage to acknowledge our weaknesses and together to take a step towards recovery. Thomas, April 2012. Introduction by Michael MacDonald. It was July 2011. Papers were scattered everywhere. Drafts on the floor, notes on the desk, outlines on the bed. I was stumped. I just couldn't relate to Ndiritu anymore. I've never been a fan of drinking, yet Ndiritu wanted me to describe his endless thirst for alcohol. I believe in the sacredness of sex, but Ndiritu asked me to describe how cheap it was. We are just too different, I thought. How can I write about a life which so obviously opposes my own? So I called Ndiritu. I need you to. I paused, hesitant to say what was next. To teach me to see with the eyes of an addict. The next thing I knew, we were sitting in a dark alley behind Taveta Lane in the biggest drug den in Nairobi's city center. Creatures with cracked lips were injecting heroin. Rastas with long dreads were smoking bangi and sipping kane. There was one street lamp, but everyone huddled in the shadows, absorbed by their own darkness. Titus leaned in and whispered, "If I had 1,000 shillings for the day, 40 were for food and the rest for alcohol. When the money ran out, I'd feel so stupid. Why had I wasted 40 on food?" At the ambassador stage, we climbed up a dim staircase to a notorious brothel, where drugged women greeted us with a grab and asked, "Want a quickie?" I dated a girl from here, Ndiritu said. She hated her job. Sometimes she had to sleep with around 40 men a day. Don't be fooled. The thought of endless sex or alcohol might entice you. But for those who have fallen into these traps, they would do anything to get out. Most people go to God because they want to go to heaven, Ndiritu said, but not addicts. We go to God because we've been to hell. As I boarded a matatu to go back home, I couldn't stop thinking of those words. I had asked Ndiritu to give me the eyes of an addict. In return, he had shown me a vision of hell. The next day, I woke up relieved but unsettled. I felt drawn to the secret life of Nairobi, and I found myself playing the memories back as fantasies. The stunning prostitute who had unbuckled my belt as I walked by, the stripper who had asked me to dance, the pimp who had pointed to a line of women and said, "Take anyone you like." I felt a great temptation to revisit those places, to walk back into that hellish world. I knew it was stupid, but I still wanted it. Hell always tastes like heaven at first. Stepping into Ndiritu's world taught me something. I had thought I was stuck because Ndiritu and I were too different. But actually, I was stuck because I couldn't face the truth. We were too similar. To continue working with Ndiritu, I had to put off the belief that he was an addict and I was not. And I had to acknowledge that addiction threatens everyone. There is nothing in an addict that doesn't exist in me in a lesser way. I don't have a clinical addiction, but had my life been slightly different, I could easily have one. And though I'm not addicted to a substance, I'm addicted to certain ways of thinking and behaving. My addiction to being admired, to feeling useful, to comparing myself with others, to being right. When I had said I just can't relate to Ndiritu, I really meant I'm afraid to relate to him. Deep down, I knew I only turned away from Ndiritu because I feared turning into him. Once I realized this, the writer's block vanished and the book took a new form. We decided to tell Ndiritu's story in the form of a diary. We thought it would be a good way to help the reader see through the eyes of an addict. Though this book is not his actual diary, it contains his true story. When people read our drafts, they were usually surprised that we focused on sex addiction more than alcoholism. Alcoholism is a bigger problem in Kenya, they usually said. Yes, but sex addiction is the bigger secret. Ndiritu always replied. They would warn us with things like these. It's better to conceal than to reveal. But Ndiritu would say, unless you reveal, you can never heal. The more Ndiritu and I worked on this book, the more we both were healed. I was healed from the belief that I was better than him, and he was healed from the belief that he was worse than me. Michael, April 2012. Certain details were censored and all the names of the people were changed. Chapter 1. Help. 1st March 2012. Help. It took me years to say this small, simple word. Years of empty bottles and meaningless sex. Years of looking in the mirror and seeing nothing. Of breathing underwater and drowning in shame. Of being excited one moment and depressed the next. Years of telling my family, that was the last time. Of telling myself, just one more. And of telling the bottle, it's your fault. For 10 years, I was running and hiding from the only word which could save my life, help, and from the only person who could decide to do it, me. But saying help was not enough. I had to mean it. I had to recover from alcoholism and sex addiction. It wasn't possible to stop drinking without being sober, and it wasn't possible to respect women if I made them sleep with me first. Things had to change. I had to change. I had to stop drinking away my stress. Drinking, after all, was the reason I was stressed. I had to stop sexing away my shame. Sex, after all, was the reason I was ashamed. I had to learn that when a woman says no, she doesn't mean yes. That having sex with 8 to 10 partners a week doesn't make me more of a man, but less of one. That watching my neighbor through a hole in the wall isn't a good way to relax, and I had to give up the only thing that numbed my shame: alcohol. After 5 rehabs, 5 recoveries, and 5 relapses, I was finally ready. I asked for help, and I meant it. Every second without sex and alcohol was a burden. When I saw a woman, I would start shaking. When I didn't drink, I would hallucinate. But I kept abstaining and telling myself, "You haven't drunk in 1 hour. Keep it up. You haven't had sex in 2 days. Well done." In 2005, my doctor told me, "Ndiritu, you are the most hopeless case I've ever seen." He was right. I was hopeless. But on 17th January 2008, I started a new journey, a life without alcohol or compulsive sex. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone. Now, when I'm drowning in shame, I swim to the surface. Now, when I visit my family, they say, "Welcome back." Help. Today, I don't only want to say this word, I want to give it. Without people's help, I would still be passed out in a ditch on the side of the road, or still running and hiding from the police. And while I know that at any minute I could slip back into addiction, I also know that today I can stand up proudly and say, "I'm free." Still, being free doesn't take away the hurt I have caused many people. Though I am recovering, many of the people I have hurt are not. And though I may never be able to give back what I have taken from them, I have a responsibility to try. This book is my attempt. In these pages, I reveal my darkest secrets, things I wanted to carry with me to the grave, hoping that with the secrets broken, other addicts will feel less shame in talking about their own addictions and find the courage to seek help. I also hope that this book will help the families, friends, and victims of addicts to better understand the nature of addiction. Ultimately, my dream is that this book will tell others what I always longed to hear. You might be the world's most hopeless case, but there is a way out. Chapter 2. The Diary. 4th January 2008. Recovery Diary. As I write this, I'm sitting in my room in the rehab. My counselor suggested I keep a recovery diary. He said that people who talk and write about their problems are much more likely to recover than those who don't. Confronting your shameful desires and painful memories eventually lessens their power over you. He told me, it will help you find meaning in all of this. So this is my New Year's resolution, to write my thoughts down as I continue recovering. 5th January 2008. A hopeless case. For every addict, my counselor said, a moment comes when the consequences are so great or the pain so bad that the addict admits life is out of control. For the past 10 years, I never took a drink that wasn't my last. I always left the strip club saying, never again. I set goals and picked days to quit. Madaraka Day, my daughter's birthday, New Year's. I made deals with God, promising to go to church if He took away my addiction. I got saved and was born again, and then born again. It was always the same story. I would decide to quit, but an hour, a day, or a month later, I would pass out drunk in a ditch, wake up next to someone I didn't know, or pickpocket a friend to pay for changa. My life was out of control, and it still is. I am an alcoholic and a sex addict. I hate what I do, but honestly, there's nothing I like more. I can spend hours at a bus stop watching women alight, hypnotized by the way they extend their legs from the lower step to the ground. I can spend days and nights locked in my room watching pornography. I can spend weeks wandering through the Nairobi Arboretum and exposing myself to unsuspecting women. I can waste years of my life having sex without love, climax without connection, and bodies without souls. And that's why I need to stop. I have become a body without a soul, a human without a being, an itch without a scratch. What once filled me with pride now kills me with shame. Drinking used to be the way I made friends. Now it's the reason I have none. Sex used to be the way I felt loved. Now it's the reason I'm hated. I went from the top of my class to the bottom, from a professor to a psychotic, from a casual drinker to an alcoholic, and from a charming lover to a rapist. Sometimes I wonder if I am cursed, or depraved, or maybe just insane. My last psychiatrist told me that I was a lost cause and a hopeless case. He said that alcohol had destroyed my brain, that I was clinically insane, and that there was no recovering. But I have to believe that there is a way out. If I'm to be insane, let hope be my insanity. Let me be insane enough to hope beyond science and beyond sin, that one day I will recover. One day I will look in the mirror and smile at the face looking back. One day I will kneel before all the women I've abused, beg for their forgiveness, and mean it. One day I will start giving back what I've stolen. I'll return to my father's house, fall at his feet, and never leave his heart again. Chapter 3. It started off innocent. 6th January 2008. Flashbacks are clues to uncovering the map of your addiction, my counselor said. Take them seriously. Write them down. Think about them. Pray about them. Try to listen to what they want to tell you. Flashback 1. House Help, 1987. She was the new house help. She brought me into a room and closed the door. I was 7 years old. My parents weren't at home. She placed me on the bed and took off my pants. I thought to ask her why. I hadn't wet myself. She looked at me with an uneasy smile, then took off her blouse. "Be a good boy," she said, placing my hands on her nipples. My stomach turned upside down. I could hear the children playing outside, chasing goats. A few minutes ago, I had been playing with them in the sun. I began to tremble noiselessly, shyly. My bottom lip curled up and I started to cry. "Don't worry," she said. "I'll help you." She took my hand and guided it along her chest. "Like this," she said. Her eyes were dark and empty, and there was nothingness in her smile. "Don't worry," she kept repeating. I felt ashamed, but I kept listening. Maybe it's worse to disobey, I thought. Maybe it's wrong, and she has a good reason for it. On the outside I was quiet, but inside every bit of my body was screaming and kicking. I tried to send her signals that I was uncomfortable, but the more I did, the more she made me touch her. When she touched my penis, the room started to spin. I closed my eyes and told myself it was a bad dream. I felt like I was being watched, like God must hate me, like my parents will kill me. And at the same time, I felt a strange pleasure rush into my body. A knock came at the door. "Waithera, I need you." It was my aunt. Waithera stumbled off the mattress and collected herself. "Titus was misbehaving," she said. "I'm caning him." Her voice was firm, no hint of panic. She turned me over and hit me repeatedly on the buttocks, saying, "Don't you ever do that again." Then she straightened herself up, put my pants back on, and lightly walked out of the room. I was left alone. My head was pounding and my palms sweating. It felt unreal. When I walked out of the room, I saw Waithera standing with my aunt. They were laughing as they watched the children still chasing goats. I sat down full of questions. Why did she do that? Was it my fault? Since I didn't say no, does that mean I wanted it? Does God hate me? Does she love me? Will she tell on me? Should I tell on her? Will my parents ever forgive me? My aunt noticed my strange behavior but thought I was just sad from being beaten. In a way, I was. I didn't know it yet, but the music of my childhood had died. I was like a voice gone hoarse. Anytime I laid on a mattress, memories and desires filled me with shame. Anytime my parents asked me how I was scared they would find out. The abuse continued for months. She always abused me behind a mask of kindness, always encouraging me to touch her first as if it were my idea. Though it was terrifying, it made me feel special. Though it was painful, it made me feel pleasure. I became infatuated with her and the attention she gave me. Sometimes she would tell me to pretend to be sick so that we could spend the day together. She would bring me to her room when she was changing clothes or keep the bathroom door open and talk to me about something trivial as she bathed, touching her legs and breast in a way that both stimulated and embarrassed me. I would stare at my feet, at the wall, or look down at my hands or up at the ceiling, anything to hide my embarrassment. An uncontrollable appetite for sex spread through my life. Anytime I saw an attractive girl, I wanted to have sex with her. If I couldn't, I would stay awake at night and masturbate. If I could, I would do as Waithera did to me. I would expose myself to the girl and ignore her embarrassment. Then I'd show her what I had learned, saying, "Be a good girl, and then don't worry, I'll help you." Flashback to my wounds, 2005. I was a grown man and a town drunk. I had been in Nanyuki for several months. I was trying to get money from a woman and had been talking to her for some time. Kids were running all around us, loud trucks rumbling by, all kinds of noises everywhere. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly, swinging her eyes around and hurrying away from our conversation. "Hear what?" I asked, trailing behind her. She quickened her pace. I stumbled after her. I needed that money. She got ahead of me, but I found her a few minutes later. She was sitting down on the ground, holding her child in her arms. His head was bleeding and her lips were pressed to his wound. It's okay," she kept saying softly. "I love you." I stood there in awe. Out of all the children's voices, out of all the noises in the streets, how did she hear the cry of her child? Over years of addiction, my cry had blended into the noise of the streets. The whole town was used to it. It was as insignificant as a dog's whine or a rat's squeak. Even my mother could no longer trust in my cry. Even I could no longer trust in her love. Somewhere in me, in that moment, when I saw that tender mother respond to her child, I felt the weight of my present reality. And I saw who I was, beneath the addictions, beneath the self-pity, beneath the sex offender. I was a child whose deepest cry was never heard, whose sexual abuse never uttered, whose victimization never understood. Not because no one was listening, but because I was not crying out loud. As I walked away from the mother and her child, my sadness turned into rage. Her voice was too tender, her words too untrue, a child too naive. Nothing is okay in this world. The bleeding never stops. The pain doesn't go. No lips can kiss our deepest wounds. No voice can convince our hearts we are loved. Too many lips have touched my wounds, but none have kissed them. Too many women have whispered sweet nothings, but none could truly say, it's okay, I love you." Chapter 4. Relapse. 10th January 2008. Withdrawals. I'm not sure where I am. I only recall waking up with my hands tied. A bald doctor came and untied me. I'm lying in bed, but I'm standing next to it. I keep closing my eyes and opening them and pinching myself, trying to wake up. But I'm not dreaming. Am I hallucinating? Am I insane? An angry mob runs after me and throws me into a dark pit. I don't understand. I call for help. No sound. Something near my shoulder. A snake crawls over my back. Vomiting rats. Doctors and nurses hurry into my darkness. They push away the angry mob and tear off pieces of my flesh. They're laughing. Pray to God, a voice says 3 times. I say anything that sounds churchly. The Lord is my shepherd. Confess the Lord as your savior. God bless Africa. The doctors melt away and I'm left alone, unable to move. The loneliness hurts more than the attacks. I want to die, but I'm too tired to kill myself. I figure I'll be dead soon. 13th January 2008. Life or alcohol. When I opened my eyes, the doctor, I'll call him Doc from now on, was staring at me. "Do you know why you are here?" he asked. I was too disoriented to respond. "You should be dead right now," he said. "You had an alcohol-induced psychosis. You ran around town chasing rats that no one else saw. You saw spiders crawling up your legs and took off all your clothes. You lay down in the middle of the road to avoid invisible swarms of bees. You stole the biggest dogs anyone had ever seen and went gallivanting through town, robbing bars and hotels. Actually, I remember very little from the past few days, only leaving the rehab after having the flashbacks which, instead of healing the pain, sharpened it. I was just going to have a few drinks and then stop for good. I just wanted to ease the pain of those unhealed memories. I ended up blacking out 2 days later when I tried to stop cold turkey, started hallucinating. That's when I must have done all the things he was talking about." Doc continued, "The police brought you here and we gave you a stopper to put you to sleep for a few days." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Are you getting me, Titus? Our drugs saved your life." He squeezed my shoulder, waiting for some word of gratitude. I gave him none. It didn't feel so good to be alive, not under these circumstances. Doc took his hand off my shoulder and ran it over his bald head. In a grave tone, he said, "If you want to live, never drink again." I can't stop thinking about what he said. What do I want more, life or alcohol? Do I even have a choice in the matter? Am I stronger than my addiction? Is life a possibility? And if it is it desirable? What is better, a miserable life or no life at all? Would I choose pain or nothingness, crisis or boredom? To stop cold turkey is to abruptly give up a habit or addiction rather than gradually reducing the usage. A stopper is a familiar term for a sedative used to treat withdrawals. Typically, the sedative is a benzodiazepine. What do I want? What do I want? What do I want? Would I rather belong to the chaos of a great addiction or belong to the loneliness of a pitiful life? 14th January 2008. What do I want? Only once in my life have I seen someone dying of thirst. I was traveling to Maralal in a lorry and the driver hit the brakes. A child was lying on the ground, face down, bone thin and still as a stone. The driver bent down and shook the boy. "Is you okay?" The boy could hardly respond, only blinked. The driver brought him into the front seat and asked him, "What's wrong? What do you want?" The answer seemed to spring out of his lifeless body. "Water," he cried. In his state of distress, the boy knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted what would save him. I'm in a similar state of distress, left alone in the desert of my own making. Many people have stopped and tried to help. When they ask what I wanted, I would say money or booze. Imagine the sun-dried boy telling the driver, "I want more thirst, more dehydration." That is me. Now, in this hospital, the doctor has tried to save me from my desert, ordering me to choose alcohol or life. Like the driver, he's asking me, "What do you want?" I've been thinking about it all day, and I finally know. I'm tired of this endless desire for something that I know is bad for me. I'm tired of waking up each morning and saying, "I must, but I can't." And of hearing others tell me, "You can," but then whispering, "He'll never." I'm tired of thinking there is no way out, that life is too much, that no strength is strong enough, no effort good enough, that no matter what I do, I lose. What do I want? An end to the endlessness. What does that mean? Either I end my addiction or I end my life. Sobriety or suicide. 15th January 2008. Today I'm writing lists to decide between life and death. Reasons to give up. Reason number 1, responsibility. If I were dead, I wouldn't bother anyone anymore. People would be better off without me. My parents are sick of me anyway. Even my mother told me that she wished I would die. Reason number 2, revenge. Maybe if I took my own life, my parents would regret the way they treated me. Reason number 3, hope. If I kill myself, the addiction will end. If I live, it probably won't. Perhaps death is the only thing strong enough to free me from addiction. It is the only thing in which I can place my hope. Reason number 4, fear. I'm afraid of continuing to fail at everything that counts in life. At least if I kill myself, I won't fail at anything new, and my failures won't have a future, only a past. Reason number 5, shame. I can't live with myself. I will never come to peace with what I have done and who I am. Reason number 6, control. Suicide is the only way I can take control of my destiny and alleviate my suffering. I am going to die sooner or later. Why not do it before things get worse? Reasons to keep fighting. Reason number 1, control. Suicide is the only way I can lose control of my destiny. I'm going to die sooner or later. Why kill myself before things get better? Reason number 2, honor. I can't live with myself now, but maybe one day I will become someone I can be proud of. Reason number 3, courage. Though I don't have the courage to continue my life, I don't have the courage to end it. Reason number 4, curiosity. If I kill myself, I won't ever have a chance to recover. What if God has something great planned for me and I die before it happens? At least if I'm alive, my success might have a future, not only a past. Reason number 5, hope. If hell exists and I kill myself, I probably won't experience an end to my torment, but an eternal continuation of it. Perhaps life is the only way to free the torment of addiction. Reason number 6, revenge. If I kill myself, I won't be able to enjoy getting back at my parents, and what good is revenge if you don't live to see it? Maybe a better form of revenge is to prove to them that they were wrong, that I can change. Reason number 7, responsibility. I have a daughter. I held her in my arms when she was born. I can't leave her in this world alone. Reason number 8, reputation. In my village, if someone commits suicide, everyone speaks badly about him at his funeral. I don't want that. Reason number 9, love. Maybe I should stay alive for the chance of love rather than kill myself for the absence of it. 16th January 2008. Flashback 3. Reasons to give up. 2003. It was Christmas morning. I woke up next to a snoring prostitute. My head was pounding and I felt like vomiting. I quietly slipped on my clothes, stole back my 500 Kenyan shillings from her bikers, and hurried out the hotel looking for a bar. Going home for Christmas, the barmaid asked. I hadn't realized what day it was. "The drink is my home," I said. "Well, it's almost empty," she said, reaching for another bottle. I missed home. The presence of my family had been replaced by empty sinatabu. Sinatabu is Swahili for bar stools. It literally means I have no problems. My mother's warm cup of tea had become a cold cup of keg. My old familiar pillow had been exchanged for the broad breasts of a hired stranger. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to go home. I shouldn't drink alone, not today. So I went. As I walked, I thought about the past year. I had found a job as a bursar, but was fired for sleeping with the students and for stealing 80,000 Kenyan shillings. Then, after being accused of attempted rape, I had to flee the village. I went to rehab in Homa Bay, relapsed in my village, and was back on the bottle. When I saw my parents' compound from a distance, memories transported me back to the fireside, watching my father roast nyama choma as my mother cooked chapati. "This is how you slaughter a goat," my father would say. "This is how you cook it. This is the tongue young men eat to learn how to speak. This is the ear young women eat to learn how to listen." My father was a dedicated man, but not an affectionate one. If he felt any affection towards me, he kept it behind locked doors, and I never had the keys. He was a worker, not a talker. A lecturer, not a listener. A king, not an advisor. While my friends ran to their fathers when they came home, I ran away from mine. He was too intimidating. The first man in the village to own a TV, and the headmaster of our local school. I boasted of his achievements, but they terrified me. How could I measure up to him? I rarely felt valued by him, though I often felt supported. Looking back, I suppose he supported me because he valued me. But at the time I thought he wants me to become better because he doesn't value me as I am. I never told him this, but I secretly hoped we would have been closer. I would have liked to talk to him about the issues of my heart, about my problems and joys. As a child, I used to wish he would put his arm around me or pat me on the head. I used to imagine him smiling at me and saying, "I'm so proud to call you my son." But I never heard these words. More often than not, I heard words of criticism. Humiliation was his preferred teaching technique. He'd often punish me by caning me with a pipe or by making me do jobs that were traditionally for women. But the more he undermined my manhood, the more I asserted it, overcompensating with sex and alcohol. My mother was another story. She was more affectionate than my father, but less consistent. Sometimes she was very easygoing, and other times she was overly strict. I remember visitors coming over only to be greeted by silence. If she didn't like you, she wouldn't talk to you. When things were bad, they were really bad. But when times were good, they were really good. I remember when we used to celebrate my birthday in primary school. Mom would bake a cake for me and carry it to the table with a present, shoes or a shirt. I remember all the visiting days she came to my boarding school with a care package. And I even remember the one time in 1989 when she couldn't come. I remember being expelled from my 4th secondary school and hearing her say, "Being chased away from school isn't killing someone. Just come home. We miss you." A cloud of dust whirled by and reminded me of where I was. Chickens were running along the path. Wooden fences laced the road. The sky was clear blue, only a few clouds. I was approaching the gate, its rusted iron sheets. I paused, wondering if I should enter. How would my parents react? Somewhere in me, I needed to believe that they still wondered where I was on this special day, that they still wanted me close to them, that they would still welcome me as I am. Opening the gate, I stepped through and walked down the path of cypress trees into the main compound. My nieces and nephews were playing kati. "Uncle has come," one shouted, and they ran towards me. My brother's eyes lit up. He was hanging a goat from a tree as my cousin sharpened a knife. He pulled on the rope to fasten the knot, then came to greet me. "It's good you came," he said with a smile. "I'm happy to be here," I said. A great sense of relief filled me. "Where is Mom and Dad?" "Mom is in the back in the kitchen, and Dad just went into the house." Walking towards the back, I greeted my aunts who were cooking rice pilau next to chicken coup, and stepped into the kitchen. There was my mother. I smiled and leaned to greet her. She backed away. "Who told you to come here?" Everyone stopped what they were doing. I was speechless. "Didn't I tell you not to come back until you stopped drinking?" I didn't move. She stepped closer, stomping her foot and waving her finger at me. "You smell like alcohol. You smell like alcohol." I thought that since it's Chris, you thought wrong. "Mom, I don't want any problems. I just don't want any problems. If you don't want any problems, better you die." My aunt dropped a sufuria. "That's the only way you'll stop having problems. And that's the only way you'll stop giving us problems. Now go and never step through this gate again." Years of frustration were finally boiling over and filling her eyes. The dogs were barking, riled up by the noise. I wanted to strike out, to beat her or to break whatever was around me, but I left before I could. As I stomped away, the children giggled. My brother tried to say something to me, but I told him to shut up and walked out of the compound and went back out to the bar. From that moment on, it was war. Robbing them was the only way I made money for the next year. One day it would be a chicken, the next day a goat, then a bag of maize or of avocados or oranges. I stole anything I could get my hands on: blankets, clothes, sufurias, utensils, anything. Sometimes I would enter the compound just before Mom returned for lunch. I would hide in an unused latrine and wait for her to unlock the house. Then when she went to the shamba, I would sneak inside and steal whatever was in her purse. I took it upon myself to make their lives a living hell. If she wanted me dead, then I wanted her buried. Flashback 4. Reasons for fighting. 2002. The muscles are not expanding well. The doctor said, "We might do a cesarean, but I need a signature from Akinyi's husband or mother." I looked at Akinyi's mother. She was looking at me. "I'll do it," I said, and followed the doctor into the maternity ward. He handed me a piece of paper. "Sign here," he said, turning around and whispering something to the nurse. I signed it and waited for him to turn back. As I waited, I looked out the window. A man was casually sitting on a bench, reading the Daily Nation. A woman was standing in a kiosk, waiting for customers. Such simple sights were shocking. How could today be like any other day? The sky was the same sky. The air was the same air. But to me, this day was like any other. It was 7th of July, 2002, the day my daughter would be born, the day I was to become a father, the day Akinyi was to become a mother, the day our bodies would bring something new into the world. I looked at Akinyi. She was sweating with a look of panic. Her braids were tangled and liar hands gripped the table. A light was hanging over her head, and next to her left shoulder was a white machine with dials and buttons. Any other day, I would have thought she looked terrible, but today she couldn't have looked lovelier. The delivery went well. The doctors didn't do a cesarean. When I held our baby in my arms, everything else disappeared. Nothing, no drug, no drink, no risk could give me the high I felt in that moment. Akinyi and I had made something beautiful, something true, something with eyes and hands and a mouth, something with tears and hunger and a heartbeat. Our love had made a baby girl. I pressed my lips to a soft little head. My past belongs to the darkness, I whispered, but my future belongs to your light. Chapter 5. Keys to my freedom. 17th January 2008. Once and for all. I dreamt of my daughter last night. We were running through the forest and I tried to run away from her, but she caught my leg. "Daddy, don't run," she cried. I tried to shake her off my leg, but she wouldn't let go. Finally, I freed myself and sprinted away. But after a few steps, I stopped and, looking back, saw her whimpering, "Daddy, Daddy, why?" I took a step towards her. Then I woke up. When I opened my eyes, I felt different. Something had changed in me. Somewhere in the depths of my suffering, in the pit of my self-hate, I could sense a greater purpose to my life. I cannot deny that my world is a living hell. All my dreams have gone up in smoke. All my self-esteem has turned to ash. All my family ties are blistered and burnt. But in this living hell is a dying angel, my daughter. She never asked to be born. She never chose her parents. She never deserved to suffer. But she was born to a drunken father and born to a difficult life. She is the only thing I would take with me from a burning building. She is the greatest reason I must put out the fire. She is the best incentive for rebuilding our home and the strongest motive for restoring my life. What do I want? To live, not for myself, but for her. What does that mean? I choose sobriety, once and for all. 18th January 2008. Why stay in prison when the door is wide and for all? Today, I woke up with such a sense of peace. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Doc asked. That question felt like the dawn breaking within me or the fog lifting up. It was like reaching into my pockets, feeling something inside and realizing that the keys to unlock my prison had been given to me the very day I entered it. Why had I spent so many years staring at the bars? Why had I spent so many nights dreaming of finding a rescue? Why had I not found in myself what I was finding now, the keys to my freedom? I doubt that I'll ever be able to answer that question. It's the mystery of addiction and recovery. It is in falling that we addicts learn to rise. It is in dying that we learn to live. And it is in darkness that we learn to love our light. but how much falling is necessary, how much dying helpful, how much darkness needed for an addict to realize that he is greater than his addiction. That's a question that no one can answer except the addict himself, and he can only answer it on that inspiring day when he reaches into his pocket and finds the key. 19th January 2008. Recovering in Dignity. Recovery in dignity is the motto of this psychiatric hospital, and they don't just preach that motto, they live it. I have never been treated with such dignity. Of course, you have to pay a great price for that dignity, but I guess my parents think I'm worth it. Each day, I meet with my referral doctor. Today, I asked him, what helps an addict to recover once and for all? His response was fascinating. Many addicts feel more like beasts than humans, he told me. They don't give themselves the right to be human, and neither does society. He set his spectacles down on the table and removed a cloth from his pocket. The most important thing is that an addict rediscovers his sense of pride and dignity. To choose himself as human is the beginning of hope. That's the turning point in an addict's life. After polishing each lens and making sure they sat evenly on his nose, he continued, we have found that the only cure for inhumanity is greater humanity. In other words, the way to turn a beast back into man is to treat him like a man. The more you treat him like a beast, the more he becomes a beast. But the more you treat him like a man, the more he becomes one. Or a woman, I said, pointing to a female patient outside his window. He laughed. Or a woman. What he said was true. My life could support it. The more people treated me like a beast, the more beastly I became. In fact, the last psychiatric hospital I was in was a place where sick men were treated like caged beasts, where the lice were more attentive than the staff and the bedbugs better fed than the patients, where the nurses locked us in our rooms 14 hours of the day and injected us with sedatives when we bothered them. Basically, it was a prison, but with one difference. We paid to be inmates. How could the human spirit rise up in such a place? The only good thing was the other patients. Some of them were clearly, in quotes, out of network, but most were relatively normal, and we bonded easily since we shared a common struggle, trying to remember our humanity in a place whose conditions were inhumane. But here, I can feel dignity coursing through my veins. Where before there was self-pity, now I feel responsibility. Where before I felt unable, now I know I am able. Where before there was no end, now there is a new beginning. As I was about to leave his office, the doctor stopped me. One more thing, he said, thrusting his fingers into the air. People also gain something from becoming beasts. What's that? I asked. He looked over my shoulder and squinted his eyes. People make beasts of themselves to get rid of the pain of being human. He stopped there as if to admire the sentence he had just uttered. Then he turned to me. Ndiritu, the more you discover the fullness of your humanity, the more you will encounter the fullness of your pain. But don't worry, your pain is one of the most precious parts of your life. Don't dare get rid of it before you have learned what it has to teach you. The bars of my prison, 20th January 2008. My pain. As a man who grew up in the village, I find it hard to talk about sex. Actually, I feel more awkward talking about it than doing it. But if I'm to learn what my pain will teach me, as the doctor said, then I must reflect on my sexual history and faced my sexual shame, a shame I have hidden from everyone in my life until recently. A few months ago, when a counselor first told me that I had a problem with sex, I completely disagreed. The only problem, I said, is that I don't get enough. When he insisted, saying I was obsessed, I retorted, "Who isn't?" And when he pointed out that my habits were destroying my life, I left saying, "It's my business, not yours." Each effort he made to help me was shut down by my defensiveness. During our next session, he reminded me of the times I took sex by force. They just said no, so I wouldn't think they were easy. He told me that they said no, not because they were easy, but because they meant no. "What do you expect?" I asked. "I'm a man. Men will be men." He argued that being a man wasn't a good excuse for disrespecting someone. But I insisted, saying, "Or we can't help it." "Do you really think that men cannot treat women with respect?" he asked. "What I mean," I said, "is that a real man gets his way. When he wants a woman, if he is man enough, he'll have her. I'm a real man, so I get what I want." "A real man isn't defined by what he gets," he said. "He's defined by what he gives. And Ndiritu, you don't look like a man to me. You look like an addict." Those words hurt. They reached deep. The truth was, I didn't feel like a man either. Still, I didn't see how I could be more obsessed with sex than anyone else. He handed me a book, Out of the Shadows, and told me to read it before our next session. Reading that book was like reading about my life, things I had never told anyone, sexual habits I had never admitted to were in those pages. For the first time since I started having compulsive sex, I realized I was not alone. According to Kant, the author of Out of the Shadows, it's good to have a healthy desire for sex, and it's normal to have regrettable sexual experiences. Humans will always experiment with things that make them feel good. But for the sexual addict, his desire has become unhealthy. He's no longer experimenting, he's hooked. For most people, they can choose the amount of sex they have and the type. But for the addict, there is no choice. He becomes sexually compulsive in ways he doesn't want to be. He finds himself doing the unthinkable, and he becomes overwhelmed by fear of life without sex, fear of his secret life being discovered, fear that no one can love him as he is. Many of the sex addicts mentioned were married, had children, had jobs. Most were men, but some were women, mothers, teachers, businesswomen. All of them found themselves in the same position, unable to control behaviors despite the harmful consequences. Marriages were broken up, children were neglected, money was wasted, jobs were lost, people were jailed, and suicides were committed. For them, sex was no longer intimate and fun. It was empty and demoralizing. But they couldn't stop. Like me, they had abused one of the most exciting moments in a human's life and ended up being depressed. When I went back to my counselor, I put away my defenses and was ready to listen. He asked some questions, I shared some stories, and he diagnosed me as a level 3 sex addict. According to Kant, there are 3 levels of sexual addiction. Each level contains behaviors that can destroy your life. So, Having a level 1 addiction can be as vicious as having a level 3, but the levels show how the behaviors usually escalate. Level 1 contains behaviors that are regarded by society as normal and tolerable: masturbation, pornography, multiple sexual partners, and/or prostitution. Level 2 contains behaviors that are seen as abnormal: exhibitionism and/or voyeurism. And level 3 behaviors are seen as horrific, such as incest, child molestation, bestiality, and/or rape. Exhibitionism is the desire or compulsion to expose parts of one's body, especially the genitals or buttocks, in public circumstances, from crowds to acquaintances or to even strangers. Voyeurism is the sexual interest or practice of spying on people engaging in intimate behaviors such as undressing, bathing, using the toilet, having sex, or doing other actions considered to be private in nature. Most sex addicts also have co-addictions, which make it hard to identify. He said, "My co-addiction was alcohol. I think the reason you keep relapsing," he said, "is because no one is treating your sexual addiction. Once you are sober, your sexual addiction flares up, and the shame from that pushes you back to the bottle." In our last session, before I left the rehab, he told me, "I think that sexual addiction is one of the greatest and least understood secrets around." "I don't know about the others," I said, "but it certainly is mine." 21st January 2008. A new concept for an old secret. Today, I told Doc that I wanted to discuss something different. His ears perked up. "What's that?" he asked. "My sex life." Unlike the counselor who I wrote about yesterday, it never occurred to this doctor that I might be a sex addict. He confessed that he didn't know much about sex addiction. He said it's a new concept for an old secret. But for not knowing much, he still knew a lot. He said we'll talk about it more. But first, he wanted me to write down what he called a sexual autobiography. In your sexual autobiography, he said, ask yourself, what were the experiences that influenced you the most? Who were the people who encouraged or discouraged you? How did your addiction start? As you write, think about the effect it had on those around you, on yourself, and think about the role it played in your past and the role it will play in your future. Finally, as a parent, how would you help your child avoid this addiction? Chapter 6, More of a Man, 22nd January 2008. Passport to Manhood. No muhaka wihure mbiro. In the Kikuyu culture, after a boy is circumcised and he leaves his healing hut, he is told that he must cleanse his penis of the dirt of circumcision, and there is only one way to do it, with a woman. For a long time, I thought that sex would relieve my personal pain. Sex made me a somebody when I felt like a nobody. It made me one of the guys when I felt out of the group, and it made me a success when I felt like a failure. In a way, it was more of a social need than a sexual one. I had sex because I wanted friendship, popularity, and respect. But I ended up getting loneliness, pain, and addiction. I began having sex in secondary school. I was late to be circumcised and my peers picked on me, forcing me to show them my penis and laughing at it, telling me I wasn't a man like them. To protect myself, I became friends with the maliest men in school, the bullies. They defended me against my peers, but exposed me to dangerous habits, drinking, drugs, theft, and sex. The head of the bad boys was Moses. Once, we went to a drama festival in Kiambu, and a girl who I had always admired was walking alongside him towards the bushes. At the time, coupling was the fashion, and sex was the secret that everyone wanted to know. Moses called me over and said, "Why don't you two have a talk?" Then he left us alone. I wasn't sure if we were actually supposed to talk or if something else was expected. To be honest, I was a bit afraid of sex. I had heard many strange things and didn't know what to believe. One friend said that when you do it, your head bursts. I thought he meant my face. Another said that you have to make sure not to pee, otherwise she might get pregnant. Thankfully, I had just made a short call. Moses said, "No muhaka wihure mbiro." But honestly, where was the dirt? All this was going through my mind the first time it happened. When we finished, I didn't know what to do. We were quiet for some time, and when the awkwardness was too much, we walked back. She went to tell her friends, and I went to tell mine. "We did it," I told Moses. He slapped his knee and threw his arm around me. "You know what this means?" There was a strange mix of excitement and arrogance in his voice. "What?" He grabbed my shoulder in a fatherly way. "Now you're a real man." "Sure." "Yes." He slapped me on the back, "and no one can say you're not." Those words, that Saturday afternoon, felt as good as the sex. Moses had never seen me as proud as I looked in that moment. Finally, I had become a somebody, and nobody could say otherwise. From that day on, sex changed from a social need to a psychological one. It became my remedy for pain and my reward for success, my source of excitement and my cure for boredom. It became the key to validating myself and my passport to manhood. By the time I had reached Form 4, I had started sleeping with multiple partners. By the time I had finished Form 4, things began to escalate. I was a very active member in my church, a youth leader, and a chief campaigner of True Love Waits. And I quickly learned a secret that religious people keep to themselves. The holier you act, the more sex you get. I began having sexual partners in all the surrounding churches, 4 in my church, 2 in another parish, and 3 in another. This is when my secret life became more real than my public life. I seemed charming, but I felt pathetic. I acted holy, but I was hell-bound. I was the envy of my friends, but I was deeply, deeply insecure. On Saturday night, I would remove all the chairs from my room, so there would be nowhere to sit except for my bed. On Sunday morning, I would give talks about the ABCs of premarital love, such as abstinence, being faithful, and chastity. But in the afternoon, I would sneak a girl into my house through a secret window and invite her to sit on my bed, since all the chairs were gone. Once a girl was on my bed, she never failed to sleep with me. But if I couldn't get her there, it wouldn't happen. And in the evening, I'd sneak her back out, telling her I loved her dearly. It was a terrible irony. Any woman would sleep with me because she didn't think I could sleep with just any woman. I always said it was my first time, and they were always the one and only one. My friends encouraged me in this. Being sexist and abusive towards women made me more of a man in their eyes, and that's exactly what I wanted. So I kept using sex to validate myself. But the more I tried, the more I failed. Deep down, I knew. Each time I abused a woman, I abused myself. But I was too deep in my own lies to see the truth. It was too easy for me to be selfish. I was too insecure to care about anyone else. In my sick mind, a woman was something to use, not someone to love. She was meant for two things, either to hurt you or to gratify you, and a man was meant for one, to hurt a woman as he gratified himself. When a woman came into my room, I would begin with a sweet talk, telling her I loved her so much, that she was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen, inside and out. I would tell her anything. If that didn't work, I'd pressure her. I know you want it. If you didn't, why would you come here? Or I'd blame her for her own abuse. With those clothes, you're inviting me to do it. If she still resisted, I would threaten her. It's going to happen, you might as well relax and enjoy it. Next to the bed, I always kept a bucket of water. If I was desperate, I would give her a choice, which wasn't really a choice. Either we do it or I soak your clothes in the water. If your clothes are wet, you'll have to stay the night as they dry. And someone as beautiful as you are can't expect to spend the night without love. On the few occasions when that didn't work, I would use force. I would pin her arms down, take off her skirt with my feet, take off her panties with my toes, and spread her legs with my knees. Once there was penetration, they always stopped fighting. I told myself that it was because they enjoyed it, but my counselor told me otherwise. After penetration, he said, things are just beginning for the rapist, but they have already ended for the victim. Chapter 7. Nairobi, the New Jerusalem. 23rd January 2008. Nairobi, my New Jerusalem. Pornography, my new Bible. In the village, you hear strange things about Nairobi. Once I heard an old mzee. Mzee is a Swahili word for an old man. It is a term for respect. I heard an old mzee tell us about his trip to the big city. It's a funny place, he said. Girls have lopsided haircuts and wear makeup. Boys sniff glue and dance like Michael Jackson. Hawkers don't move at the speed of normal humans. They move like bees, quickly, unpredictably, dangerously. The matatus. A matatu is a common form of public transportation, usually the size of a minibus. The matatus sting anyone and anything. Nairobians don't talk like other Kenyans. They are not friendly. They mix all sorts of strange things in their Swahili, and their children grow up drinking Coke, eating chips, and dressing like Hollywood. I think they're the reason we have no rain this year, he said. In the eyes of an old villager, Nairobi is a strange and friendly city, but for a college student, it's a bright and shining opportunity. And for a sex addict, it's the New Jerusalem. When I first entered the university, a friend introduced me to his drug of choice, pornography. In Nairobi, he said, they talk a lot about safe sex. He held up a DVD with 2 naked women on the cover. Sex doesn't get any safer than this. He lent me the DVD and I was impressed. With porn, I could have sex anytime, anywhere, in any way, and with anyone. no consequences. At first, I only watched porn occasionally, on weekends or late at night. But after some months, it became a part of my routine. There was a time for studying, a time for sleeping, and a time for watching porn. That was life. Night after night, I would close the curtains, lock the door, and lose myself in the images, holding off until I had found just the right image to get my sexual, in quotes, fix. I began to masturbate every day, then several times a day. It was strange. My sex drive was no longer aimed at people, but at a machine with a screen. It began to have more power over me than I had over myself. People had to compete with it in order to win my attention. If Nairobi was the new Jerusalem, porn had become my new Bible. I felt guilty about it, but it seemed like an improvement. Before, I had used women's bodies to get satisfaction, but now I only used their images. Of the two options, I thought, this one certainly causes less harm. Looking back, I'm not so sure it did. My mentality towards women worsened. I completely lost what little ability I had left to appreciate them for who they truly are. I couldn't walk by a woman without turning around, or talk to a woman without undressing her with my eyes. Though porn showed thousands of naked women, it couldn't quench my thirst for the female body. In fact, it only intensified it, only perverted it. I thought porn was harmless, but it did harm me. I told myself it's just a hobby, but no other hobbies made me feel so ashamed. I convinced myself I'm learning new things, new techniques, but in truth, pornography can only teach you one thing, one nasty lie, that a woman is nothing more than 3 holes, arid 2 hands. 22nd January 2008. All I need was a good woman. Everything changed, at least for a while, when I met Akinyi. She was beautiful, innocent, intelligent, and for some strange reason, interested in me. The type of girl who makes you want to change your ways. So I did. I changed my ways and promised to give her the love she deserved. I even ditched the porn and reduced the masturbating for a while. Things started off well. I joined her church group and we worshipped together. I even became the liturgical master of our religion. On weekends, we would go out dancing, and on weekdays, we helped each other study. All I needed was a good woman, I told myself, and now my problems are solved. I was wrong. My problems were hidden, not solved. Over time, they crept out from their hiding places, and the urges were back full force. It started with small things like visual infidelity. A beautiful girl would walk by us, and my head would turn. I would act like my eyes were watching something else, a car or a sign, but I was memorizing the woman's body to use it later. Then it progressed to, in quotes, accidental infidelity. In crowded places, I found myself brushing my hand against a woman's thighs or breasts and acting like it was an accident. I felt terrible about this, but I would go out of my way to do it. I didn't know how to stop. In bed, I was selfish. I asked her to do things that made her uncomfortable, and she agreed because she didn't know how to stand up for herself without hurting our relationship. She just ignored my abuses, hoping they would disappear. But I could see that I was hurting her, and knowing that hurt me. My drinking soon got out of control. Nothing else could numb my guilt, and suppress my sexual pain. I think Akinyi suspected that I was an alcoholic, but again she pretended like everything was okay. When she got pregnant, the pretending stopped. Things she wouldn't have even whispered before, she was now screaming, and she introduced a new word into our relationship. No. No more drinking, no more bars, no more clubs, no more looking at women. No, no, no. This couldn't go well for my low self-esteem. It made me feel depressed, and I responded to depression by drinking more. We were still in school, but I was long gone, lost in alcoholism. I became such a chronic drinker that I spent every day in the bars and every night on the streets. Our relationship never ended with a fight or a disagreement. There was never a time when I decided, I'm out of here, or when she shouted, don't come back. It ended the way someone suddenly slips into a deep sleep, closing their eyes to the world and opening them to a nightmare. I forgot my life, I forgot my love, and I forgot my newborn. I only remembered one thing: thirst. Everything else was history. 25th January 2008. I left Nairobi a few months later, hoping to escape the nightmare. I was constantly running from something or someone. College was boring, so I ran to my village. My village was cruel, so I ran to Nyeri. Nyeri was boring, so I ran to Nanyuki. Nanyuki was cruel, so I returned to Nairobi. 4 miserable years passed, and I ended up where I started, in my nightmare. The following flashback is suited in this moment. Flashback number 5, My Sugar Mommy, 2006. The pub was teeming with beautiful women. I sat with a group of friends and was laughing so hard. I kept falling off my taboo. I had quit college, left rehab, ran away from home, and was searching for a place to stay. I felt my phone vibrate, so I went outside to answer, hoping it was someone offering me a room. As I talked on the phone, I spotted something moving in a car across the street. By the time I realized what it was, the call had ended. A woman was changing clothes in her car. I put the phone back to my ear and acted like I was still talking. I couldn't see the details, just the outline. But before she pulled a sweater over her bra, she saw me. I turned my head, pocketed my phone, and hurried back into the bar. A few minutes later, I felt a hand on my back. It was the woman. She wrapped her arms around my neck and laughed. I've been watching you all night, she said, but I didn't know you were watching me. She pressed her breast against my back. I turned my head to look at her. She looked twice my age. Let's go to your place, she said, reaching her hand around and squeezing my thigh. I don't have a place, I said. Then we'll go to mine. Bottles rolled back and forth on the floor each time she shifted gears. Each time she stopped, the bottles clanged heads. The careless Toyota sped through the city streets, heading for Parkland's estate. We pulled up to a large compound. She parked and we walked into her house. Do you want to take a bath? She asked. No, I'm all right. Go and have a bath. She threw me a towel. Really, I'm okay, I said, throwing the towel back. Fine. Well, I'm going to have one. She slung the towel over her shoulder and turned towards the bathroom. Wait for me in bed, she said as she closed the bathroom door. I heard the water start running and I looked around the room. I'd never seen a bed like hers. The frame, the mattress, the canopy. It was like something from a movie. I crawled into the bed and slipped under the covers. I could hear her humming in the shower. I pulled the covers up to my neck and closed my eyes. Was I really going to do this? She was old enough to be my mother. Maybe if I act like I'm asleep, I thought, nothing will happen. Her humming stopped and the water turned off. I clenched my eyelids tighter and tried to force myself to sleep. The door squeaked open. No sound of slippers, only bare feet. I heard a towel drop to the floor and the bed creak as she climbed in. When I woke up late the next morning, she handed me a Guinness and pointed to a box on the table. "Open it," she said. Inside were 2 shirts, some boxers, and a pair of trousers. "I hope they fit," she said. "I didn't know your size." The shirts were Manhattan. I'd never owned such shirts. "I don't know what to say," I said. "Say you'll stay for the weekend." "I don't know. I've got some things I should probably do." "Like what?" I tried to think of something, but was still so sleepy. "I've got classes." "Classes? You want to leave me for classes?" She slammed her Guinness down. "Why?" "So I can get a job." "Why?" "I need money." She laughed. "So why leave me and my money?" She had a point. "You found what you were looking for. I'm in." I didn't know what to say. "Classes," she repeated mockingly. I grabbed the bottle and took a swig. That was the beginning of my 9-month stay with sugar. Chapter 8. Night Walker. Am I a pervert? 26th January 2008. Getting some fresh air. Exhibitionism and voyeurism. Like me, Sugar had been sexually abused as a child and left with an emotional opening that she tried to fill with alcohol and sex. She was the opposite of Akinyi. Rather than saying no to my bad habits, Sugar said yes. She'd pour my morning, in quotes, eye-opener, and finance my visits to the River Road strip clubs. She would walk around the house naked and never complain if she caught me watching porn. She was a unique catch. The only woman I'd ever met who was more self-absorbed than I was. And in a strange way, that was nice. It made me feel better about myself, and it allowed me to play the victim, one of my favorite roles. She cheated more than me, blacked out more than me, and embarrassed me sexually. Next to her, I felt like a good guy, even a sober one. It wasn't ideal, but held together was better than hell alone. It was around this time that my sexual addiction took an unexpected turn. Late one night, I left Sugar's house after an argument. I wanted to get some fresh air. Walking through the neighborhood, I noticed an open window. An old woman was undressing. She wasn't especially attractive, but I was completely aroused and began to touch myself. It was the highest high I had ever known. Another night, I tried the same activity outside a girls' dormitory. I was afraid, but it felt incredible. Not long after, I was walking through an empty alley when a schoolgirl walked into the alley. I was overcome by curiosity. Can you do such things in daylight? Might she enjoy it? I tried to stop myself, but it was no use. Just when she was about to pass by me, I stepped in front of her and unzipped my fly. She didn't move. I pulled it out and started masturbating. She just watched. A few seconds later, I ran away. I had never experienced such a thrill. When I got home, I felt demoralized. What was wrong with me? Why was I like this? What did that girl think of me? I promised myself never to do it again. A few hours later, as I played back the memory of the schoolgirl, a rush of desire overcame me. Next thing I knew, I was, in quotes, getting some fresh air for more than 2 years. I spent my days and nights as a voyeur and an exhibitionist. It was the worst period of my sexual illness. I began to know Nairobi in a different way, in terms of when and where the women would be. In the morning, I would board crowded matatus and try to accidentally grab women. In the afternoon, I would visit colleges and look for the right moment to unzip. At night, I would join the addicts and huddle around the Koinange street. I felt disgusted with myself, but I didn't know how to stop. I kept asking myself, why was I doing this? Why did it feel so good? And why did my passport to manhood become a passport to madness? 27th January 2008. My vandalized love map. Until today, I never had an answer to these questions. Actually, I doubted the existence of any answers. I'm just a pervert, I thought, and I'm cursed. Yesterday, when I confessed to this doc, telling him about my habit of, in quotes, getting some fresh air, he wasn't surprised at all. In fact, he said that it made sense. You are not a pervert, he told me, but something inside of you is. What is that? I asked. Your love map. I didn't understand. Between the ages of 5 and 8, he told me, most children's brains have already decided what is sexually arousing to them. Psychiatrists call this your love map. When a child is sexually abused, the abuse vandalizes his love map. Sometimes this makes him sexually attracted to things that are unsafe or, as you say, perverted. In pursuing these sexual dreams, he ends up creating his own nightmares. He continued, oftentimes our first sexually arousing experience becomes the model for what excites us for the rest of our lives. He paused and looked away as if trying to remember something. Remind me, when was your first experience of sexual arousal? When I was 7, I said, with the house help. Would she undress in front of you? Yes. How did that make you feel? Surprised, afraid, disgusted, and strangely aroused. And when you first walked through the neighborhood and saw the old woman undressing, what did you feel? I guess I felt the same. I was surprised to see a woman undressing, afraid that I might get caught watching, disgusted with myself as I masturbated, and at the same time I felt strangely aroused. But was the woman attractive? Not really. So why did you watch? I don't know. Maybe it's because that scene had all the ingredients of your original abuse. The surprise, the fear, the disgust, the arousal, even the age difference. I'm not surprised that you experienced it as the highest of sexual highs. Seeing that old woman undress before you was just like seeing the house help undress. It was a perfect match for your love map. What's your point? My point is this. No one can choose what arouses his or her body, and no one can change it. What you did was perverted, but what you are is not. Inside of you is a 7-year-old boy who was trained to desire sexual experiences that are both humiliating and comforting. Ever since you were sexually abused, you have found yourself desiring these experiences and responding to unhealthy sexual triggers. You keep asking yourself, why am I like this? What's wrong with me? But the truth is, there is nothing wrong with you. Something wrong happened to you, and you haven't known how to deal with it. Actually, you've handled it quite poorly. But you are not alone. In all my years of psychiatry, I never met a voyeur or an exhibitionist who wasn't sexually abused as a child. I didn't understand everything he said, but it felt true. He left me with these words: even though your love map has been damaged, with courage and practice, you can learn to live responsibly with it. If you do, you'll break the cycle. 28th January 2008. My sexual sobriety plan. Today, Doc and I wrote my sobriety plan. We must define what it means for you to be sexually sober, he said. For an alcoholic, it's easy. No drinking or mood-altering substances. But for a sex addict, it's more complicated. The goal isn't to abstain from sex altogether. It's to learn to express your sexuality in a way that won't make unreasonable demands on your time and energy, place you in legal danger, or threaten your mental, physical, or spiritual health. Doc had me draw 3 circles, one inside the other. In the innermost circle, I wrote my bottom line behaviors that are unacceptable and constitute a sexual relapse. In the middle circle, I wrote my borderline behaviors that lead to a relapse. And in the outer circle, I wrote my top line behaviors that enhance my life and recovery. Writing these wasn't easy, especially when it came to porn and masturbation. Does porn lead to relapse, or does it constitute a relapse? Is it the same as walking into a bar, or is it like taking a drink? And what about masturbation? If I masturbate but don't watch porn, can I call myself sexually sober? Or is that like saying I'm sober because I binge on beer instead of changa? After talking through these questions, Doc and I wrote and signed the following contract. My sexual sobriety plan. I am sober as long as I do not pay for sex, visit strip clubs, expose myself to strangers, have anonymous sex, peep on women, accidentally grab women, or use women for my own sexual satisfaction without considering theirs. I have slept but not fully relapsed if I use pornography, masturbate, overgaze at women, or do anything sexual that produces shame, secrecy, or isolation. I am in danger of sleeping if I look at highly sexualized media, go on late-night walks, fantasize about sexual scenarios, engage in seductive or flirtatious behavior, spend too much time alone, or linger on feelings of resentment, self-pity, or blame. I am promoting my well-being and fighting the addictive pull when I do physical exercise, read inspirational literature, keep a steady job, keep a journal, pray, and engage in professional counseling. Doc typed it, printed it, and told me to carry it in my pocket everywhere I go. This is your compass on the road to recovery. Chapter 9. Getting Tested. 29th January 2008. To test or not to test. I met with Doc again today. He said that he thought I could leave at the end of the month. But I need to ask you something, he said. Have you been tested? I hate that question. People ask it all the time. I almost got tested twice. Once in Kariobangi and once in Asumbi. In Asumbi, I changed my mind before entering the pre-counseling session. And in Kariobangi, I left before the results. No, I haven't, I said. Can I arrange for one? I don't know. I avoided his eyes. My life is miserable enough. I don't want to worry about dying all the time. I hadn't told him this, but at least 2 of my sexual partners had died of AIDS. I knew their status, and I still had unsafe sex with them. That's how addicted I was. Even death couldn't stop me. Wouldn't it be nice to know? His voice was growing stronger. If you don't have it, you'll stop worrying, and if you do, it's not the end of the world. The earlier we begin treatment, the better life you'll be able to live. Besides, it's better to be safe than sorry. Yeah, that's what people say, I said. But they also say that ignorance is bliss. I think I would rather die ignorant and happy than sick and afraid. But can you really be happy without knowing? He was getting upset. You are ignorant now, but you don't seem happy. You seem afraid. I would be more afraid if I knew. I stood up from my chair and turned towards the door. I didn't like where this conversation was going. Titus, he slammed his hand on the desk, looked me directly in the eyes, and pointed at my heart. Deep down, you want to know. You need to know your status, and we both know why. Now I was getting upset. I rolled my eyes. Why? Because casting a disease out of your mind won't cast its powers out of your body. He opened a drawer near his right knee, pulled out a file and began to write, saying, "To protect those around you and for your own sake, I insist that you get tested before you are discharged." I was afraid of that. Knowing will help you in your recovery. If you test negative, the recovery will be different than if you test positive. It was decided. No more discussions. But I wanted to have the last word. Fine, I said. But finding out won't help. There's nothing positive about testing positive. True, he said. And there is even less about not testing at all. 30th January 2008. The results. I was sitting in a room with grey walls. Posters were shouting at me about the death tolls in Africa and the importance of safe sex. One poster even listed the ABCs of sexual relationships. Only instead of chastity, it said condoms. I sat in the waiting room. I thought of all the reasons I should leave. The tests are not always accurate, and I don't think being terminally ill will help me recover. I was worried about what my family would think, what the neighbors would say, and most of all, how I would handle the guilt of having infected hundreds of women. A nurse called my name, and I followed her into a room. She asked me some questions. Why do you want the test? What are the implications? How many sexual partners? I lied for most of the questions. I already had a good counselor. I didn't want another one. After the session, I went into another room. A man was waiting for me with a pin. "Let's just get this over with," I said. He pricked my finger and took a drop of blood. Then he handed me a small piece of plastic. If you see one red line, then you are HIV negative. If you see two red lines, then we have to do additional testing to see if you are positive. It only took a few minutes, but it felt like hours. When I saw the results, my stomach dropped. 2 lines. I knew it. This is stupid, I said. I shouldn't have come. It's not confirmed, he said. You need the bioline test. He opened the kit, he pricked my finger, and we waited for the results. 1 line. What does that mean? It means we have one more test. This is the tiebreaker. I didn't appreciate that comment. This was my life, not a football match. He pricked my finger for the 3rd time, and we waited. 20 minutes passed. I didn't look. 30 minutes passed. Still couldn't. An hour went by. My hand was shaking. I held the test face down. I was terrified. Once I looked at it, my life would be over. I wanted to run away, to throw it out, to go back in time and change my past. If only a different woman had been hired as our house help. If only my classmates hadn't picked on me. If only I hadn't befriended Moses. If only I hadn't used sex to feel like somebody. If only, if only, if only. I could hardly breathe. My heart was racing. Slowly, I turned it over. 1 line. A second chance. 31st January 2008. A new beginning. I want another test, I told Doc. Why? There must be a mistake. Did you take the Unigold? I nodded. Then there is no need. No, but I slept with hundreds of women. Some died of AIDS. I must have it. Titus. He took a deep breath and gestured for me to do the same. Listen to me. The tests are 99% accurate. You don't have it. You don't. Hundreds of faces passed before my eyes. Faces of relatives, friends, classmates, lovers, faces of people with families, careers, futures, faces of good people, great people, people who had died of AIDS, but deserved to live. I began to cry, uncontrollably, hysterically. I don't deserve it, I said, falling to the ground. I cried for each day, each minute, each second of my addiction, for the bright-eyed boy I used to be and the red-eyed addict I had become, for my loving parents and their worn-out hearts, for my abandoned girlfriend and her fatherless child, for all the darkness I had brought into the world. I am hardly a man, a beast of a man, I choked on the words. Slept with hundreds of women, used them, raped them, ruined them. I broke nearly every one of God's commandments. But God has given me more life. I don't deserve to live. Doc got up from his desk and sat with me on the floor. Life is a mystery, he said. Some people get more than they deserve, and others get less. He put his hand on my shoulder. I could feel his warmth, his care. But everything happens for a reason. He handed me his handkerchief since mine was drenched. I remembered the boy in Nanyuki, the one whose mother had heard his cry, touched his wound, uttered those words, "It's okay." I felt like that wounded boy as I cried on the ground. Doc's hand felt like that voice saying, "It's okay." Usually, his voice was confident, soft. The people who deserve mercy the least are the ones who need it the most. My tears were slowing down, my body feeling calmer. God is giving you a second chance. There is only one question left. Will you take it? I'm not sure how long we sat there, but as time passed and as my tears dried up, a mysterious sense of gratitude began to fill my soul. God's love had finally reached the innermost chamber of my being. His mercy had finally kissed my deepest wound, self-hate. And for the first time in a long time, I was able to believe in the fullness of my humanity, to feel the fullness of my pain, and to see that the long journey of recovery had just begun. Chapter 10, Final Word, by Titus Ndiritu KIHARA. I am writing this from my parents' home, and I think I am probably a little bit more anxious. Not because I feel threatened. I have given many talks about my addiction to therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, and people working with alcoholics. But because I think this is probably the first book in Kenya to talk about sex addiction, and it exposed what I have hidden from everyone in my life until recently. I wanted to carry these secrets to the grave, but now everyone will know them. I am afraid of what people will say. When I confess that I am a recovering alcoholic, people are usually understanding and supportive. Some are even proud of me. Yet, when I confess that I am a recovering sex addict, people are unsympathetic. They take more distance, and very, very few think that it's something to be proud of. Still, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we say that a person is sick as his secrets, and that the wealth of your recovery is too good to keep to yourself. I trust these are true. Let me tie up some loose ends. When I left the psychiatric hospital, Doc saw that I was truly determined to stay clean, so he sent me to volunteer at a rehab. When I was an inpatient, rehabs never worked, but as a volunteer, things were different. By helping others, I was able to build up my self-esteem and help myself. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous were crucial in this. To this day, recovery is not easy, especially when it comes to sex addiction. I want to find a lasting relationship, but since I'm a sex addict and have a sobriety plan, I don't know how to go about it. I might know a lot about sex, but I know nothing about intimacy. And even if I genuinely want to be with a woman, if I sleep with her, I always lose interest. I guess that's one of the side effects of sex addiction. Also, trust is always an issue. Because I spent so much time lying, I find it hard to trust, and others hardly trust me. Not only that, but trying to right my wrongs can be very difficult. In 2009, I went for my daughter and found that Akinyi was already married. Her husband didn't want to care for someone else's child, so he sent her to Akinyi's parents to be cared for. After talking with her parents, I asked them to give me the chance to be the father I never was. Now it's been 3 years since I started living with my daughter, and I wouldn't trade those years for anything. This book might seem harsh on my parents, but you must understand that addicts are expert blamers. At the time, I blamed anyone and anything for my shortcomings. Everything that occurred in my life was someone else's fault. Surprisingly, my family still loved me. Without their support and love, recovery would not have been possible. They believed in me and invested their time, money, and energy in someone who kept letting them down. My mother was willing to support me at any cost, and I'll never forget when my father told me, "We love you the way you are, and we'll continue loving you until you learn to love yourself." I believe that this book has the power to change things. I think we can change ourselves, and we can help others to change. I hope we were clear about what went wrong in my life, how it went wrong, and how the endlessness came to an end. I also hope that the references at the end of this book will be helpful to families, friends, and victims of addicts. They should help you to better understand the nature of sex addiction and how to recognize the signs and know the consequences. As I write the final words of this book, I must say that I am not ashamed like I used to be. My suffering has helped me to reach out to others. In forcing me to my knees, it has created an opportunity to surrender to the loving care of God. Ndiritu, April 2012. Chapter 11. Self-Test. Sexual Addiction Screening Test. Disclaimer. This assessment is for informal purposes only and cannot substitute for a full evaluation by a clinical professional. The assessment should only be used as a guide to understand your sexual behavior and the potential consequences associated with that behavior. So, here are some questions for you. Do you believe you have a sexual problem? Have you been abused or emotionally neglected as a child or adolescent? Do you regret the amount of time you spend in pursuit of sex or romance? Did your parents have ongoing sexual or romantic problems? Do you feel preoccupied or distracted by your sexual thoughts or activities? Has paying for sex ever challenged your finances and forced you to lie about it? Does your significant other or others, friends or family, ever worry or complain about your sexual behavior? Do you have trouble stopping your sexual behavior when it goes against your values or when you know it's inappropriate and or dangerous? Has your involvement with pornography, strip clubs, online sexual interactions, cruising for sexual partners, etc. become greater than your intimate contacts with romantic partners? Do you keep the extent or nature of your sexual activities hidden from your friends and or partners? Are you eager for events with friends or family to be over, or for a spouse or significant other to go someplace without you, so you can more easily pursue a sexual adventure? Have you had certain kinds of sex or had sex with certain people that later disgusted you when you thought back on it? Do you believe that anonymous or casual sex has kept you from having more long-term intimate relationships or from reaching other personal goals? Do you have trouble maintaining relationships once the, in quotes, sexual newness of the person has worn off? Do your sexual encounters ever place you in danger of arrest? For example, seeing prostitutes, having sex in a public place, etc. Have you ever potentially exposed a loved one or spouse to a sexually transmitted disease and not told them about it? Do you have unprotected sex with prostitutes and or anonymous partners? Please consider unprotected as oral, anal, vaginal experiences without protection. Are you intensely engaged in collecting pornography? Has your sexual behavior ever caused physical or emotional harm? For example, lying to partners or friends, or breaking your commitments and giving people diseases? Have you ever been approached, charged, and or arrested by police or other security personnel as a consequence of your sexual behavior choices? Has your social interactive time decreased due to the time involved in sexual activity and or fantasy? As an adult, have you ever been sexual with someone under the age of 18? When you have sex, do you feel depressed afterwards or later regret it? Have you made repeated promises to yourself or another person to change some form of your sexual behavior only to break those promises later? Have your sexual activities interfered with some aspect of your professional or personal life? For example, caused problems at work or loss of a relationship? Have you engaged in repeated experiences of unsafe or risky sex, even though you knew it would cause you harm? If questioned, do you lie to those close to you about your sexual behavior? Do you routinely pay to have sensual experiences or sex? For example, massages, see prostitutes, and or visit strip clubs? Have you ever had sex with someone just because you are feeling aroused, then later felt ashamed or regretted it? Have you ever cruised public toilets, stages, parks, matatus, and or other public places seeking anonymous sexual encounters? Here are a few books suggested for you to read to understand more about sexual addiction. Well, there are a lot, but I'm gonna read just a few of them and leave the names of the rest below for you with links on where you can purchase them. Book number 1, Out of the Shadows by Patrick Kantz. Understanding Sexual Addiction. This groundbreaking work was the first book on sex addiction and is considered a classic in its field. It defines sex addiction, describes its stages, and lists the false core beliefs in addicts. Book number 2, Contrary to Love by Patrick Kantz. Helping the Sexual Addict. This is the sequel to Out of the Shadows. It adds to Kant's original description of sex addiction and offers his sexual addiction screening test. Book number 3, Sex Addiction by Hazelden Publishing. Answers in the Heart offers daily inspiration to encourage recovering addicts on the road of recovery. It is the best daily meditation book available for sex addicts. Book number 4, Women, Sex and Addiction by Charlotte Davis and Cassie. A Search for Love and Power. Women's Sex and Addiction is full of insight on how women can understand and heal from sex addiction, romance addiction, and sexual codependency. Book number 5, Mending a Shattered Heart by Stephanie Kantz. A Guide for Partners of Sex Addicts. Mending a Shattered Heart addresses the common questions faced by the partner of sex addicts. Questions like, how do I decide whether to stay or leave? Book number 6, The Secret Sin by Mark Leiser. Healing the Wounds of Sexual Addicts. Like I said, you'll find the names of the rest of the books below with links on where you can purchase them. If you managed to get through the entire book, thank you so much and I'm so grateful. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and welcome back for more audiobooks.